words represent a view of education held many Protestant Christians. This is another in our series of programs on philosophies of education.
National Educational Television presents Philosophies of Education, one in a series of 13 programs presenting some of today's leaders in American education, produced by KTCA-TV, St. Paul, Minneapolis. Teaching methods and courses of study in our schools differ greatly. This diversity, while an inherent strength in a free society, may be confusing. Teacher and school are differing beliefs about such matters as human nature, knowledge, values, and the good society. These comprise different philosophies of education. The purpose of this series is to set forth a representative group of these guiding philosophies. Here is Dr. Harvey M. Rice, president of McAllister College and host of our series.
A part of the genius of Protestant Christianity has been its encouragement of a wide range of viewpoints on most subjects. In this, education has been no exception. Thus, there are many points of view that can be called Protestant on education. At the same time, there is a central Christian tradition, beginning with Jesus and the apostles, reaffirmed by Luther, Calvin, and the other reformers, that provide a basis for convictions about teaching and learning. In Europe, the Protestant Reformation exerted great influence in support of popular education. This grew naturally out of the Protestant insistence upon individual responsibility before God and the importance of every believer's being able to read and understand the Bible. In America, Protestant churches have taken a leading part in the advancement of education at all levels. They early founded colleges for the education of clergymen and later for instruction in all of the branches of higher learning. They also, for the most part, have been vigorous promoters of free, universal public education, in spite of the problems that are raised by seeking to relate a religious faith to the public schools in a pluralistic society. Let us look now at a quotation from an article in the magazine Religious Education by Theodore M. Green. This quotation, a portion of which you have already seen on this program, will introduce us to some of the leading ideas of a Protestant philosophy of education.
Education divorced from religion is doomed to spiritual sterility. Religion divorced from education is doomed to superstition. A dogmatic religious faith and a dogmatic secular philosophy of education are bound to be mortal enemies. But religion and education, in proportion as both are honest, informed, and humble, that is, truly liberal, are natural allies. In other words, if religion is man's search for and response to ultimate meaning, and if education is man's total preparation for a meaningful life, it follows that only religion can give ultimate meaning and depth to man's aspirations, and that only education can make these aspirations intelligent, informed, and creatively effective. So defined, religion and education are both absolutely essential to man's perennial quest for responsible freedom and enlightened dedication.
We are fortunate in having as our guest on this program Dr. Merriman Cunningham. Dr. Cunningham received degrees from Vanderbilt and Duke universities. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and earned his Bachelor of Divinity and Doctor of Philosophy degrees at Yale. Following that, he was Director of Religious Activities at Duke University and served as Professor of Religion at several colleges. For 9 years, he was Dean of the Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University and is now serving as Director Designate of the Danforth Foundation. During these years, Dr. Cunningham has written several books on religion and education. Among these are The College Seeks Religion and Freedom's Holy Light. Dr. Cunningham, it's a pleasure for us to welcome you to this program and to have you to share with us your views on a Protestant philosophy of education. Dr. Cunningham, what are your views on this subject?
The first thing to say about a Protestant view of education is that there is no such thing. Protestant views of education there are in abundance. But there is no one view that alone can be taken as authentic. This might be taken by some people to be a kind of weakness in Protestantism. Folks might say Protestants don't know where they stand because they can't get together, or they can't get together and thus they don't know where they stand. Actually, this would be, I think, a serious misconception. Rather, it ought to read, Protestants don't agree on any one thing, education or anything else, because they do know where they stand. Which takes us right to the heart of what Protestantism is all about. When the great movement began in the 16th century, the two words by which we know it tell us most about its character, Protestant Reformation. For those early leaders were engaged in protest against what they thought were abuses in the church of that day and reform of those abuses so that there could come to be a better church. Now, any of us who is to be engaged in protest or reform is going to have to speak his own mind, and thus there was built into the Protestant position the right of private judgment. Diversity is part of the Protestant tradition and part of the Protestant belief. I can't speak on this subject for Protestants, nor can anyone else. And the fact that I can't is itself a Protestant principle. There are other principles, it seems to me, that are also involved in this subject of the Protestant view of education, on which at least there is consensus of Protestants through the years. Some of the old watchwords remind us of them: the priesthood of all believers, that each man has direct access to God and must serve as his neighbor's priest, the authority of the Bible and thus the need to read and understand the Bible. All of these great beliefs, some of which Protestants share with other Christians and with Jews, serve to make up a kind of testimony on the problem of education or anything else. And so if someone were to ask, what does this mean for education? I think the answer would be quite clear. Protestants, first of all, are committed to education by virtue of their very being Protestants. In order to read the Bible, as you yourself were saying earlier, in order themselves to know the nature of their calling in the world, to understand better their relationship with men and with God, the Protestant must search diligently, must develop his own capacities as far as possible, must seek to replace ignorance with knowledge and immaturity with maturity. And so, from the beginning, Protestants must believe in education. Once this is said, there are, I think, two special things to say about a Protestant philosophy. The first of these could be phrased this way. Protestants believe that schools must be good schools and colleges must be good colleges. Now, one could easily say, of course, everybody believes that. What is there distinctive about it? I do not claim that there is anything distinctive, but I do insist that it is part of the Protestant heritage to drive towards excellence in education. Time and again, it is true that Protestants themselves have not been fully loyal to their heritage, and many of the great universities of this country, independent and tax-supported, are often truer to the Protestant tradition, perhaps, in this regard, than some of the denominational colleges that seek to put limits on learning and to fetter the free mind. Be that as it may, the Protestant tradition believes in excellence in education and derives this from its understanding of the ways of God and men. The other basic principle, as I understand it, is one that is considerably more controversial. The Protestant position would have it that education, like every other area of life, must recognize that God is the sovereign of life. Thus, a Protestant view on education would hold that the schools must find some appropriate way of noting that man does not live by bread alone, and that in the total picture of the training that is to be given, the school must recognize that God is, and that God is sovereign. I suppose some people would want to take the position that neutrality on this matter is desirable. Sometimes you hear this suggested. The difficulty with this is that neutrality is simply not possible. However desirable one or another person of whatever religious heritage or of none might feel it to be, it simply cannot be. Our schools and colleges are not neutral on many of the crucial issues of life, on freedom versus slavery, for example, or on knowledge versus ignorance, or on character versus the lack of it. And because our institutions make clear that they believe in freedom and knowledge and character, sooner or later they are going to have to give those beliefs some kind of ultimate rootage, some sort of cosmic support, if you will. If they do not believe that these things are somehow in the essence of things, then eventually it's all a relative matter after all, and we end up by not believing in them. The Protestant tradition would call to mind that these values and others in which school men believe must be rooted in a conception of the universe that God is the ruler. I think it should be emphasized that this point of view applies to all kinds of colleges and all kinds of schools, not just to parochial ones and church-related ones. For in the Protestant view, there is no proper separation of the various spheres of life between secular and sacred. All of life is one, and all is subject to God's mercy and judgment. And thus, religion, as it comes into the school in terms of some kind of proper way, which itself is a very difficult question, religion must be brought with education together, for only as religion and education can be made partners in the process have we any hope to see through to a better day.
Dr. Cunningham, you have suggested that education is not complete unless it recognizes the supremacy of God in man's affairs. How can you bring religion into a school system in the condition of the pluralistic society of which our country is a part?
This is, of course, one of the most difficult questions that can be faced in this whole area. Certainly, our pluralistic society does require a kind of non-sectarian approach to this problem. The question how is awfully hard to know exactly how to answer. And yet we do get some leadings on this question, I believe, from, say, the area of government. Certainly, the relation of religion to government is one of our most debatable areas. But even there, we have discovered ways of recognizing our basic dependence upon God. In God we trust, we say. Our stamps and our coins remind us, but often our diplomas don't. And yet I think I ought to say, lest someone believe that what is desirable is Bible reading in schools and the mention of God every time the little school child turns around, that many of the efforts now made in this area to take God into the educational picture are, at least in my own way of thinking, unfortunate and unwise ones. We are not called upon to bring religion into the school in any situation in which it does not properly belong. We are not wanting to be sectarian any more than we are wanting to be secular. Only when religious subject matter properly inheres in the subject under treatment ought it to be brought in. Only when the religious stance is appropriate to the concern under question ought it to be taken. But there come times in the life of every school when such mentions and such notice is appropriate, and at such times a secular philosophy of education is found seriously wanting.
Well, even with this somewhat non-directive approach, would we not be violating the concept and the constitutional dictate of separation of church and state to bring even this much of religion into the schools?
I think not. I recognize that the question you raise is one that puzzles us greatly. Again, we do not fully understand all that is allowed or all that is proscribed by our so-called principle of the separation of church and state. But it is quite clear on the basis of the history of the development of that American principle that this principle never meant to eliminate all relationship of religion with government, all mention of religion by government, or vice versa. This principle in its origin was equated with the disestablishment of a special church that had a special relationship with the state. And when this disestablishment took place, first in Virginia and then in the other colonies that had various degrees of establishments in colonial times, this move was called separation. It was brought about by dissenting groups who were seeking their own freedom or full equality for their religious groups in the eyes of the law. That is to say, it was brought about by religion. It was not a blow aimed at religion, but was, as some scholars have called it, a staff to support religion and religious equality in our country. We have, therefore, in this nation, a double principle of the relationship of religion to government, and the particular phrase we use often calls to mind only one of the two aspects of this relationship. We have a separation of church and state as organic entities, an organic disconnection, if you will. And the second aspect of the relationship is that we have a sympathetic association, which was present when the principle was established in order to make it possible, which has existed through the years in countless ways, in ways in which our government recognizes religion on a non-sectarian basis.
Are you saying then that even though we have a separation of church and state, this does not preclude the assumption of God by our government?
This is my opinion of the matter. That is to say, it does prevent sectarian practices, for it is part of our American system that government may not aid one religious group at the expense of others. But it is equally part of our American system, as I read the record, that government may and ought to note that religion, religious faith, is at the heart of the understanding of our democratic way of life, and that, as I was saying earlier, God is supreme.
Well, now, may I ask you this question then? Assume for a moment that we were to agree that religion in some way, as you suggest, would be introduced into the schools. Where would the competent teachers, where would those people who are our teachers learn enough about religion to be able to present it as a matter for discussion in the schools?
You put your finger upon, of course, one of the great weaknesses in our present practice, for certainly so many of our teachers are simply not competent to speak about theology or about religion. Many of them are hardly competent even to point out the relationship of religious thought to their own particular subjects and disciplines. This is one of the areas in which we must do a great deal of work. But one is not asking that all teachers be theologically fully educated. One is asking simply that they be informed laymen in respect to their own faith, whatever it is, and that they take proper note, not bootlegging religion, of the religious perspective in the treatment of their particular subject matter.
Dr. Cunningham, is it not one of the functions of preaching in the Protestant church to educate its laymen? Let us look in on a sermon on Christian education.
And in summary, the goals of Christian education are the following. 1, to lead the student into a personal relationship with God. The primary purpose of good Christian education is to see that the individual student becomes a closer ally of his God. 2nd, to give to the pupil an understanding and appreciation of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, and to lead that student into being one of his loyal followers, not merely an academic understanding of Jesus Christ and his teachings, but to be an actual follower of the Master. Another one of the goals of Christian education is to encourage the students' enthusiastic participation into the building of a Christian community in a Christian world. Only by having active participation in his local community can the one who comes under Christian education be of even greater influence in the larger world sphere. Next, to develop both the ability and desire to participate actively in the life and work of his own Christian church. The one who is educated from a Christian point of view is not to be interested only in the distant scene, but also he is to be interested in the local scene. For only by building strong cells can the Christian bring his greatest impact into the total community. For human beings are fissionable material, and they influence one another in chain reaction. Next, one of the goals of Christian education is to train the student in the discipline of piety and the mechanics of competence. The late Dr. L.W. Bow, one-time president of St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, once made the statement, "Piety without competence is as bad as competence without piety." The total personality is the goal of the one who is being educated according to the teachings of Jesus Christ. Finally, Christian education is to give the student a positive working knowledge of the matrix of human wisdom, namely the Holy Bible. For this is the matrix from which comes human wisdom in its finest form. Amen.
Dr. Cunningham, what do you think of that?
I think several things. I wish I'd made notes on it, for one thing, for if and when I'm called upon to preach a sermon on Christian education, I would like to be able to have the wit to say the kind of thing that he said. This is an excellent statement. Nevertheless, for the purposes of our discussion, I'm inclined to think that it is off the topic that we have been talking about here. This good minister has spoken of a philosophy of Christian education, whereas the theme that you and I have been discussing is a view, a Protestant view of education in general, not specifically Christian, but of education in general and what this means. Most, if not all, of the things that our minister in the picture spoke of would be inappropriate for the public school, for it is necessary that the public school be non-sectarian. The last point he made could be translated, I think, and ought to be, into any kind of educational system, public, private, whatever. The point about the desirability of knowing the Bible as one of the great monuments of our Western culture. But others of his points have to do with specific Christian training, which the church must give attention to. My own point, however, has been to say that education in general, what we often call, but shouldn't, secular education, must give recognition because it aims to be good education, not because it aims to be Christian or religious in any way, must give recognition to the source of knowledge and the author of truth.
Well, I wonder then if you would now give us some ideas as to how citizens and teachers can, in the schools, apply the philosophy about which you have been speaking.
The practical problem is always the sticker, and yet it is, of course, the one that we must face. I think the first thing I'd want to say to your question is to suggest that this whole question itself needs to be broken open for discussion among schoolmen, elementary, secondary, higher education, among teachers in all subjects all across the country. The very kind of thing that you and I have sought to do here must increasingly be done. This surely is step number one. For it's a strange thing that we are afraid of this topic. We stand on tiptoe when anyone ever suggests that God ought to be brought into the public school. I do myself. I am nervous about some of the ways in which some people interpret this. I don't want prayers lugged into a school system where they don't belong, Bible readings inserted that offend someone or another segment of our population and that are essentially irrelevant to the task of the school. And thus, I say, our first task is to discuss this subject and see what it is possible, what does make sense in terms of our school system from top to bottom as we know it. Beyond this, of course, we must develop a willingness for careful experimentation, for trying out some ways of making clear the relationship between education and religion. There are a host of such experiments already going on across the country. I know of one in a teacher's college in which the faculty have been brought together to discuss this very thing meaningfully in respect to the religious perspectives of their own particular disciplines. I know of another state university in which the teaching of religion as a subject matter is being approached. As a matter of fact, it's not just one state university that is providing for such a program now, but quite a number are seeking this. There are fruitful experiments going on all across the land, and we need to expand these. I think the thing that ought to be said in conclusion, however, is simply this. The Protestant view of education of which I speak does not ask that any one thing be done. Rather, it asks that a certain attitude be felt. The attitude that religion and education, both rightly conceived, are partners and belong together. We shall have this puzzling question of how with us for a long time to come. That they belong together, however, is the contention of the Protestant view on education.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cunningham, for this most interesting and enlightening presentation of the position of a Protestant view of education. For the past half hour, we have been examining with Dean Merriman Cunningham a Protestant philosophy of education, those basic thoughts and beliefs which guide educational practice. We hope you will be with us next week when we present another in our series of programs on philosophies of education.
National Educational Television has presented another program in the series Philosophies of Education, produced by KTCA-TV, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
This is National Educational Television.